Hey everyone, welcome. Anders Sundquist here, host of the podcast Lean In, founder at Flawless Recruit. And today I'm very excited to have with me Melissa Nixon, alumni and people recruiting leader from Meta and Mapbox, and Garrett Miller, current GM at Mapbox. And today we're going to be talking about the questionable, taboo, how do I do it, where are we going topic of offshore hiring, the philosophies and the fundamentals. So before we dive into this topic and unpack some of the mechanics and strategic decisions, Melissa, I'll let you introduce yourself and then we'll come around the horn to you, Garrett.
Right. Thanks as well for having me. This is really fun, and I love that I get to
Yeah.
spend the afternoon chatting with you too. My name's Melissa Nixon. As you mentioned, I spent some time at Mapbox, some time at Meta, and before that, I spent about a decade at Google. Most of my experience has been in tech and recruiting and the challenges of scaling. And in my last role, I was supporting the entire people team, so HR, communications, ops, recruiting, etc. Right now, I'm on a career break and taking some time to hang out with my kids and travel and ski and do the things that I want to do. So that's me.
So yeah, and thanks for being here. Garrett, on to you.
Yeah, thanks. Hey, everybody. Great to be here. Melissa and I were partners in crime at a time at Mapbox. I'm currently leading our global revenue organization for Mapbox and have done actually a number of different things here, so can speak about a lot of different dynamics. In my career, I always like to say kind of straddles the line between commercial and product. Right now, I'd tell you I am a product-oriented commercial leader, but might tell you the reverse of that in different walks of life. So used to like to work at acronyms, spent a lot of time at SAP and GE, always kind of straddling that line. So excited for today's conversation.
Yeah, and welcome, Garrett. Thank you, and want to say thanks for joining us on the show today. Your energy together is infectious, and definitely a fun time when we talk about any topic, but especially today, offshore hiring philosophy. So in the current recruiting market, especially in tech, this is a hot topic. And when the audience today, talent leaders tuning in are curious about the hows and the whys, and so I kind of want to kick us off on the esoteric topic of a company that might be initially expanding beyond the domestic, the states, and so making those initial decisions for offshoring. Melissa, from the people perspective, tell us a bit about the why a company would make this decision and what should be included in the shortlist and the factors and influences.
Absolutely. It's a big topic. And to be honest, it's not just about like offshoring, like leaving the United States or the country of origin. You also sometimes have to think about different states from the one that you started in, depending on where the company is at, because
Right.
that can be, right, that can be a big decision as well, both from legal standpoints, everything that G&A deals with on a regular basis can be affected depending on what state you're in as well. Philosophically, my perspective is you have to remember that this isn't just about offshoring. It's a very common idea that the main reason to leave the United States is a cost savings measure.
Right.
The
Right.
reality is there are so many reasons that different companies will decide to expand to different countries. It could be because they want to find talent elsewhere. It could be a cost saving measure. It could be that you just want to take advantage of customers that are in different places, or it could be timing, right? You want to make sure that you're covering the entire globe when it comes to time zones and that kinds of things. So I think there's many, many reasons why companies decide to move outside of whatever their original hub is. And the most important thing is that the company is clear on why you're doing it. And so,
Yep.
just philosophically, the most important part, I think, is the beginning, the decision making, making sure that all the right people are in the room having a conversation and that you have a framework for that decision making that will serve you every time you need to consider a new country. What about Ireland? Or should we go
Right.
into China, right? Every time you have that conversation, you have to go back to your framework of 10, 15 reasons, prioritize of why you actually want to hire human beings in different places.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
think,
Go ahead, Garrett.
yeah, I would just chime in. I mean, particularly picking up off that last point that Melissa brought up. I mean, I think that's one of the things that we did well when we were working together at Mapbox was really setting up that framework for how do you think about it? What are the top dozen things that you're trying to accomplish that are the drivers for why you're considering a new location in the first place. And then that really helps guide you to a decision and a strategy on, well, where does it make sense to go? Kind of doubling down on what Melissa was saying there too. In my current role, I'd always tell you, well, you got to go to where the customers are. But that's also really true. And that's true whether you're thinking about it from a sales perspective, from an engineering perspective, going to where your customers are so that you understand what they're facing into and can work
Right.
closely with them is always a major advantage. But I always look at it in three terms, right? So customers is one, talent, and making sure that you're able to access the talent that you want.
Yeah.
And then the third one is oftentimes at a price that you're willing and able to afford. There is, I kind of look at those as the three things that you got to make sure that you're thinking through and balancing, and can certainly break those down into many, many more. But from a high level, I think that's kind of, those are the three things as you build out your dozens of decision criteria. Like think along those vectors. I think that's always been helpful for us.
So now walk us through potentially the following a customer story. So maybe at Mapbox or really anywhere in your experience where it's like, okay, so we have this new customer and we want to enter a new market. So we have the how and we have the why. Now the how comes into play with this framework, this playbook. What pages are in this playbook that should be considered before actually setting up Nexus or using an EOR? We'll get to that in a minute. But what is that playbook? What are the pages there?
Start.
Yeah,
So the
Sure.
playbook to start out looks different for every single company. Thing that I always go back to is Google did this really well. When Google started
right,
moving into new markets, new cities, new countries, a lot of it was based in the sales teams that they had actually already landed, and was to take advantage of by landing those sales teams, especially for Google. The business was growing like wildfire, and they needed to be where their customers were while it was growing because everything is just moving so fast. They had these smaller hubs set up. It actually made it much easier for Google to make the decision, okay, Seattle's got, a 10-person sales team and a small office, but we know that there's a huge amount of talent in Seattle.
right, right,
That's a good place to go next. And Google wasn't thinking a lot about cost at that time. They were definitely thinking about scaling talent and being able to hire talent in many different places for their distributed offices. So playbook, my opinion, is always going to start with what do you already have in place? What are you trying to accomplish? And going from there. You mentioned how you go about it. And I think that if you plan to truly scale, an entity is always the way to go, because laying down um, uh, that infrastructure, if you have the ability to do so, is going to often serve you. It takes a little bit longer, and there's a trade-off there. But I think that that's always a good idea if you're going somewhere that you want to, that you want to be in. If it's more like a, hey, we have this really great talent and they happen to be in, I don't know, Finland, it's going to be a better option for most companies to just go with a team that knows what they're doing there already and run
right.
your business through them. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely agree with that. And I think it's always helpful to have a kernel of a starting point, and that could be
Yeah,
a
a
customer, it
beachhead.
could be,
Right, right.
yeah, you got to have a beachhead, whether again
Yeah,
it can be a customer like your Melissa was talking about with Google. It could be a key talent that happens to be there that's already part of the team. It could be a lot of different things. But I think about one of the things that we did together at Mapbox of building out our London location, which I know you've had actually a couple of experiences building out London, and
Yeah.
I think maybe Mapbox got to benefit from your previous one. But we had a sales organization that were very purposeful about saying, okay, well, we want to build in Europe a commercial organization. What is the right place for us to go put that? Well,
right.
London is very accessible to all of Europe. You get lots of different language skills that show up there so you can serve the market. And so we had invested in that as a go to market center. But then as we were looking to how do we expand our technical talent pool and where can we go build around an existing spot, it's like, oh gosh, well, London is a really attractive place. And we've since followed on and built out a much more comprehensive team that now resides in London. But it always has to be some kind of kernel of, or beachhead. I like that. That's a better way. We're not eating corn here. We're like taking the beach. That's good.
Yeah,
We're
I think that's
storming
a
Normandy.
I need to go there. I think that that is a really good point, Garrett. And I think, yes, customers, it's a great place to start. But I actually think what is even more important is that you get the right people in place. And it has to do with, yes, I have the same kind of philosophy around entities as I do about recruiters. You know, you're going to stick around there for a while and you want to grow
Right.
significantly. Getting a recruiter on board on the ground who's got
Yeah.
that understanding of the culture, the company, but also of the country itself, and
The
understands
local
that
geo.
market,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
inside and out, that is so valuable. And also the things that I'll call it meta, even though Facebook keeps, I always call it Facebook. It's hard for me to change. But Facebook did this really well, was they landed teams that were engineering, product, leadership, who were not only willing to wear
Right.
all the hats of growing a
Yep.
new office, but also had that core cultural understanding of the company, how they make decisions, what fun looks like, what talent should be, like what that talent bar should be. Landing that kind of leadership talent, or moving that leadership talent to the place. Like, you
Yep.
know, we this Garrett, when we landed both London and we decided to scale Finland, right, at Mapbox,
That's right.
getting that leadership talent in place is so critical to the success of that longer term office.
Oh, totally agree. And so what we're talking about is there's sort of this PEMDAS, this order of operations from the math world and people launching in a new geo. And what I'm hearing is let's say Finland. I'd love to unpack more about that. We choose Finland for whatever reason, following a customer, strategic expansion, be due to talent density or cost, or all of the above. And so now we're launching in Finland. It sounds like an initial let's say beachhead for that region might be followed by scaling from a strategic leader, whether that's, say, an engineering leader who has a talent attraction pull to their story, the impact that they can bring to the team they're building. And you're really using their experience, whether they moved there and relocated or it was a strategic hire, and then you're building and mapping out based on that person's leadership philosophy, probably leadership skills, and also that core geo's culture. So let's talk a bit more about Finland. It's a market that I'm actually not as familiar with. I'm sure our audience would love to hear a bit about you. What was unique about launching in Finland from a culture and from a scaling perspective? Were there different recruiting fundamentals that you applied from London or from Bay Area? And tell us perhaps a bit about that.
So Finland's an interesting market because there is a lot of talent. It's limited. I mean, it's not
Mhm.
the larger countries in the world, and
Yeah.
going into Finland at some point you'll hit a critical mass where you've really tapped the talent. From a scaling perspective, I think it's really important to do your research up front, and we did a ton of
Yeah.
research to understand what are the companies that are based in Finland that we want to tap into, steal people from, right? Doing that research into who's already there and can we get them and what is our reputation, and laying that foundwork for groundwork is foundation and groundwork together. You guys can take that word now. So laying that
You're making it
foundation,
up here.
that
You got it.
groundwork. I just made up a new word. Do you like it? Laying that foundation for your brand, I think, is also another really important part.
Yeah.
And we did that really, really well. Mapbox did that really well, in my opinion, did that really, really well, both with the tech and taking advantage of the smaller market and really getting into that tech market and making those connections, whether it was through universities or other companies or our customers who were there. They knew who we were. That tech talent knew who we were, and that made a big difference. So when we came in and we applied, I got to give credit where it's credit due. The recruiting team was phenomenal in building out strategies to do like batch days, which I was a little skeptical of. I hadn't seen that outside of college recruiting. I hadn't seen that really successfully be implemented. But Liz, who came out of Amazon, she had really done some great work around that, and she applied that strategy to our engineering talent in Finland, and it worked really well. It was a really fun event that they put together, and we were able to hire very quickly there. But your strategy is always going to depend on what are you hiring and how fast do you need to hire them. And that was a big factor with Finland. We needed to hire a lot of engineers and product and designers, and we needed to hire them quickly.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think yeah, I would maybe add a with that, and maybe some like tips and tricks of whether you're thinking about how to start up a new location or scale up a new location.
Yeah.
One of the things we did, and we talked about sort of criticality of key talent, we actually took one of our co-founders and he moved to Finland, and helped
Oh,
to
wow.
kind of establish that, build it out, kind of inject the ethos of Mapbox and make sure that we've got the right talent bar. And, we had a footprint there, but I think really helped to accelerate that motion that we were really looking to scale, as Melissa was talking about. But also, say you both mentioned sort of the culture thing. So I think that helped like implement and really solidify the culture. But the other piece that is important as you think about other locations is each location is likely going to have their own identity, but it needs to share the same culture of the company. And not to go too off on a different tangent there, but I do think one of the things that we did well as a company was to invest in what are the values that matter to Mapbox. And that establishes a common language and a common set of behaviors and practices and expectations that you can then take that. And again, everybody's got their own ID, but everybody needs to have that same kind of corporate language and behavioral
Right.
norms to be able to execute. So I think having that as part of the foundation of getting going, really important. And then, I mean, the batch day stuff, Melissa, that you did was just so cool because it was, you just like turn on the spigot and all of a sudden this wave of talent coming in. So really effective strategy, how to go hire fast. But again, you got to put in the thought up front about what do you want, who are you going to target, and you got to
Yep.
really invest to make that thing work. But when you do it well, it's magic.
So it sounds like this initial research, Melissa, or some might even say like a talent intelligence report, which can be done internally with a variety of tools, or you can, of course, pay consultants to provide this talent intelligence. And if you're tuning in today, that should include at minimum, a TAM, a total addressable market for the roles you're looking to hire.
Yeah.
And then some additional information around compensation bands, et cetera, to make sure you're aligned with local market norms, and then also labor laws, local labor laws, and what's the norm for employment mechanics, full time versus contract, et cetera, and then all the
Well,
benefits associated. So yeah,
and the other thing I would say is without a doubt, depending on the size of your organization, you may not have the ability to do that internally, or you may not have the ability to do that
okay,
effectively. And I would
yeah,
say, without question, if you have the resources to go to professionals around this and really get a good report, a good understanding, that is a better way to go than trying to do it in a scrappy way, in my experience. Sometimes you have to, and that is fine because it is expensive, but it is often really worth it, because you can,
it
you
can
can
save
miss
money in
stuff.
the long run, investing
Yeah,
up front. Yeah,
or make wrong decisions and then have to
yeah,
clean those up.
yeah,
Just fail to launch, right? That's a
yeah,
very expensive experiment, when you fail to
yeah.
launch. So I would definitely recommend, if you can, if your company can spend the money on that, which, I mean, we've all experienced incredible belt tightening in our market over the last couple of years, right? So a lot of companies can't, but if you can, I think it's really worth it. There's something you brought up, where it made me think of how remote has thrown all of this for a loop. Whole concept of, remote
Sure.
hiring. I think it was when you were talking about all the different pieces coming together. Without a doubt, another really important part is making sure that your entire G&A team knows this is coming and that you're touching base
Oh, yeah.
with that growing organization more than you think you should. And that was really hard during remote, right? We couldn't travel. We couldn't go and put boots on the ground and understand what's really going on in the office and ask those hard questions about how people are doing and how that office is growing and what they need, right? That's such an important part of growing. It's not just launching it, right? It's staying on top of it, especially in those early days, to understand if it's growing in a healthy way, to make sure that your whole G&A organization, from payroll to security to IT, that everybody knows that this is happening and is preparing their teams for everything that they need to do. Because if you miss that
Right.
step, you're constantly playing catch up, and you're the jerk who didn't tell them that they need to prepare for this thing, and it hits the employee experience hard.
Totally. So that's probably page one in the playbook, is over communicating with the stakeholders, and your peers. Actually, Garrett, want to come back to you were complementing sort of the recruiting team's recruiting strategy, and I think you used a term batch days. And if you're tuning in, I'm sure you may have heard of this, but I actually want to unpack this a little more. I hear this has been incredibly successful in recent years with some of these sprint type hiring or hyper growth during a short period of time. Very effective strategy. I think people have different understandings of what this means. And, Melissa, I'd love to, if you can unpack a little bit more about how did you actually set up or architect the batch days? And
Mhm.
that sounds like it was a great success in Finland, and I'm sure other geos in your career.
So the team did this brilliantly, in my opinion, and I can't give them enough credit for it. So to start out, obviously you do the research, you start building out your sourcing list, right? You build out who do you reach out to, and you start that as soon as possible. But you set a date down the road for when you expect actually do the interviews. What a batch day is you do all of the interviews at once, whether it's over the course of a week or sometimes all in one day. You basically use the same group of interviewers, you train the heck out of them so that you really trust the decisions that they're preparing to make. And then you make all those decisions very quickly so that that whole group gets hired, I don't know, 10, 20 people at a time, or you can do it on a very large scale. Google did this in their university hiring, and that was like, I don't know, hundreds all at one time, right? But this is, you have a set amount of time, you source like crazy, you reach out, you start setting up the meetings, you do all of that activity leading up to a certain day or a certain week. And then over the course of that week, you do all of the interviews at the same time with the same group of people. And then very quickly, you make your decisions about who within that group that you just interviewed you actually want to hire. You put out all the offers, you do all the negotiations at the same time, and then sometimes they even start all at the same time, which has benefits when it comes to onboarding that group all together at the same time. Is that kind of what you're getting at, the
Oh,
mechanics of
absolutely.
it? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a very useful strategy to scale quickly and also synchronized. You mentioned,
Yeah.
being able to not just interview, feedback, offer, but then onboard, which I'm sure helps those G&A partners we touched on earlier.
Yeah, exactly. One of the most important parts is that everybody understands what timeline is so that all your recruiters and all your sourcers are building that pipeline at the same time, that you have a really tight group of people who are focused on it, and that you include the interviewers early on, so that they are well acquainted by the time they're actually doing the interviews of what we're actually looking for. That communication is super high so that everybody has good judgment when they're walking into those meetings. And at the end of the day, they're using the same criteria to make those decisions.
So it sounds like there were some great successes when you two were working together, and previously in your careers, launching in new geos. Those W's are fun to look at, and we learn just as much from failures or mistakes. I'm curious, Garrett, when you look at in your career launching offshore in new geos, what comes to mind as like top lessons learned? What mistakes have you seen or personally been a part of that you might want to share with the audience on what to not do?
Yeah, I mean, I would maybe pick up on kind of the culture piece that I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
When I was working at GE, one of the things we did to really spike our footprint, we were building out a new digital business attached to an industrial one. We said we're going to go do an acquisition, and we want to be in a geo we're not in today. That's going to be strategic for us going forward. And so we said, great, let's go buy a company in APJ. It's going to get us into that market, and it's going to get us a talent footprint that we don't have today. I'd say there are a few things that, there's always like the post merger integration process of any acquisition, but particularly if you're doing that in a different country,
Oh
in a
yeah.
different time zone. If you miss that part, it really, really is painful. So if regardless if it's an acquisition or it's a setting up a new office organically, you've got to invest in actually putting in the time to make sure that you're setting the cultural norms and getting the actual company culture embedded in it. I would also say time zones actually do matter. And we were a West Coast based company trying to like spin up something brand new technology, new market, new talent type. And that was hard. Like if you can limit the degrees of change that you're going to go after at one point when you're setting up a new location, like the new location is already new. If you can try to find some commonalities, what you're starting with, whether that's a particular type of talent, maybe it's just better, or it is a language that you've got to make sure that you're baselining across. Now, we were in Australia, so English was fine going across it, but there were just so many different moving pieces the more that you can normalize the change ahead of time and then really invest in setting cultural expectations with that new location, it just goes so much smoother. And I've seen that go well and not so well
Yeah.
in many cases. And that's which is why I bring up the culture piece early, because you got to get the right language established. And I don't mean, is it English? Is it German? Is it French? Is it something
Right.
else? But how are you actually making sure that it's part of an integrated whole and it's not just something that's out on its own island?
That change management piece and that cultural integration, you actually both touched on that earlier, was that baseline. This is the corporate language. These are our values. This is our ethos, and making sure that's the common language. And then of course each geo will have its own, unique properties. Melissa, what comes to mind for you on lessons learned? Maybe the top one or top any lessons from the mistakes that you've made launching offshore in your career?
I think expectation setting is so key.
Yeah.
Like everyone needs to really understand what we're doing, right? Why are we doing this? What does success look like? What is the reason behind this? And setting those expectations with the people that you're hiring there, as well as the people who are doing the hiring and the company as a whole. What is the purpose of this new office, right? Because if you don't experience, some of the biggest mistakes were made when the expectations weren't clear, or you hadn't actually done the research into the things that you would have done the research into if you had different expectations, right? If you thought you were just going in a onesie twosie way, you may not do the depth of talent mapping or the understanding
Yeah.
of the talent wants there. I think sometimes of Poland, and this happened when I was at multiple different places. Poland is tricky. Their employment laws have changed significantly over the last 10 years. And so really gaining an understanding for that before you go diving into, a market that is full of great talent is really important, because in many cases we found ourselves with, we're able to hire the talent, but then they leave very quickly because they're moving west, or find the amazing talent, but they actually want to be contractors. And we're not
Yep.
really set up to build that, right? So that's a really good example of setting clear expectations for what you're trying to do, and then understanding if that market will provide that for you. And then also, like, you have to be flexible. When you're building something like that, you have to really go with the flow and know when you need to change direction, and change quickly. The failure to be adaptable and flexible, is a big part of, I think, why those things fail. Those distributed offices fail, because you just didn't move fast enough to fix something that was going very wrong, either from a hiring, growing, or culture perspective.
Yeah, I
Well
want to pick
said.
up on something you said there, Melissa, which also came up in batch days, and it's sort of like do your homework. It's like the whole thing of measure twice, cut once.
Yes.
Yeah,
Whether you're picking a
absolutely.
new office location, or you're doing a batch day, or you're trying to pick the right beachhead for this new location that you're going into. Over rotate on doing the upfront work to make sure that you're setting yourselves up for success. I think yeah, I think picking up on what you're saying there, Melissa, it's super important lesson in most things in life, just to be clear, but certainly as it relates to picking new locations.
And
Yeah, I couldn't have.
you can't, it's a complicated thing. You can't simplify it. There are things you can simplify, right? This is not a thing to try to make simple. You actually, I tend to overestimate how complicated it's going to be, so that nobody's surprised when it is. I think that's a big part of it. It's not just an easy thing to go hire somebody in Spain. What?
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing, and underestimating the complexities is definitely going to get you in trouble one way or another.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one thing that's coming up for me is, especially around sometimes the sense of urgency for cost reduction. And on that topic, I've had, many customers or friends try and launch in certain geos, perhaps too quickly, and not necessarily for the wrong reasons, but sometimes ill-informed. One geo that comes to mind is like in India specifically, Ring Road, Bangalore can be very competitive, and there's some nuances to that market. And those that know will know that attrition and fall off is high. In some cases, it's expected to be 30, 40, 50%. And so,
Mm.
sometimes I'll see business leaders, want to launch quickly for cost reasons in a market where there might be factors they're not considering, like the pass-through rates being more challenging than other markets. And so there's trade-off decisions to be made, and beyond talent intelligence, doing the proper I think internal discussions around why we're doing what we're doing, kind of bringing us full circle here,
Mhm.
are really important. And then setting those expectations, like you said, Garrett, with everyone of what this might be a bumpy road, and in order to get here, here's our playbook to do X, Y, and Z. So it's
And
definitely a complex topic.
the cost is never static. Like you never actually
No,
can account for all the costs. And so I think one
yeah,
thing that a lot of organizations do is they go, oh, salaries are very low in that area. Yeah, well,
yeah,
taxes are really high on
yeah,
corporations, and so you have to really evaluate all of that. All of that. You have to bring your finance team and be like, what are all the things that we're going to have to pay for? We have people in this geo, and then go from there. And like you said, the attrition rate, that's expensive.
oh yeah,
Companies don't think about how expensive it is to deal with a high attrition rate. You are constantly churning. You need more recruiters to deal with that. You need
yep,
more people on the ground to deal with that. And so, all of those costs, you have to, if you don't know what they're going to be, you have to make educated guesses about what those additional costs are going to be before you actually go in for like a cost saving strategy.
Yeah, one of the costs you didn't mention, but is sort of implicit in what you're saying is the coordination cost. Having another location or having lots of locations takes a lot of effort from a company to do that, right? You've kind of heard
Mm-hmm.
like the G&A side of it, all the things that go into making sure this works.
yeah,
Of how do you pay people? Are you compliant with the local laws? Are you paying the right taxes? But also from a leadership and an executive perspective, as soon as you've got more locations, you're going to need to be on a plane and going out there and seeing these folks and making sure that you're not just coordinating from abroad and making sure information and work product is flowing between. But there is a cost of on leadership to make sure that you're actually keeping
yeah,
these things healthy and the outcomes that you want are being achieved. So big G&A cost, big like leadership management cost. Obviously, lots of companies make this decision, so the costs tend to outweigh the benefits tend to outweigh the costs. But being realistic, as you were saying,
yeah.
Melissa, about all of the costs, whether that's something that you can put on a line item or the intangible cost of it, is really important to consider up front.
It's very sobering to hear all the factors included, and that's, it can be a long road to go, but clearly well worth it for organizations, scaling globally, following the customer base, or for whatever other reason.
100%.
So as we look forward, 2025 is right around the corner.
Oh,
And I'm curious to learn from each of you your personal forecast, your personal crystal ball. It is Halloween tomorrow, so if we were to look in the crystal ball, I'm very curious to learn, what does your crystal ball say for the overall tech market? Quickly your 2 cents there, and then specifically, what will next year look like? From uh, a hiring perspective, an offshore perspective, and any other, suggestions or thoughts that you have. Garrett, let's start with you, man.
Yeah. What do I think it's going to look like? I mean, I think that the tech industry, my prediction, gosh, this is like armchair economist here. This is going to be amazing to see what
Yeah,
comes true from this. If I look at where, and I don't want to be quite so American centric, but I do think a lot of kind of global economics and global financial policy does oftentimes originate here. I think when we look at what's happening in the US markets, where we see good job growth, we see inflation relatively tame, we see interest rates continuing to come down. I mean, the NASDAQ yesterday hit an all time high. I do think that there are a
mm-hmm.
lot of head or tailwinds taking us into 2025. So I would predict that we'll see bigger growth coming in tech, and certainly from a hiring perspective. Now, I don't think any session like this would be possible to post if we didn't somehow talk about AI and what the impact is on that.
there's the
I think that
buzzword. Yeah.
all right, we're waiting for it. We're waiting for it. But you're asking me to do like the hand wavy prediction thing.
Yeah,
So,
let's do it.
now's the right time to bring it in. I mean, there are massive efficiencies that are being driven inside of
Yeah.
all companies that are leveraging this technology. And everybody's trying to figure out how to best deploy it, whether that's engineering talent that is being augmented. And so you don't have to hire as many. I think those entry level positions for engineers are still going to be fewer than what they have been in the past. I think we've probably all seen a lot of headlines around what's happening in the tech job market for new grads. I think that will continue to be challenging. But it is also, I'm not a Luddite, right? I think that there are going to be lots of new opportunities that it creates, but I think we're still catching up with what the first wave, I think, is everybody's trying to think about what that innovation is. Really, where it's mostly getting deployed today is to drive efficiency, which means fewer jobs. But I still predict there'll be job growth in the tech industry as we look at some of those macro trends that are out there. So I don't know. Those are my 2 cents, but I don't know. Maybe Melissa may contradict me there and see a different world. I don't know. What do you think?
I'm not going to contradict you. I don't think. I agree completely with everything you're saying. I think the wild card, we have to mention AI, but we also have to mention that there is a very important election next week. I mean, who knows how we're going to look at this when we see this after whatever happens next week happens. But as much as I'd like to believe that the economy is very stable and that, whoever's president isn't going to change that, I think it will drive, if nothing else, it will drive companies' decisions to move. I think a lot of companies have been in a bit of a standstill to see what comes next in this regard. And I think that once that lands, once we get through the holidays, which are always inevitably a slowdown or a speed up to slowdown, I think by January, we are going to see companies taking action on growth plans. That said, I think that everyone has learned some very difficult lessons over the last 2-3 years. We've had to go through growth and shrink and grow and shrink, and it's very painful for a lot of companies. And so I would be really surprised to see even the biggest companies going hard to grow like crazy, to say, okay, thousands of people in 2025. Don't think we're going to see that kind of demand for scale. I think I hope it's going to be thoughtful growth. It's going to be more of a focus on skills-based hiring and understanding what talent you really need instead of trying to scoop up all the talent, right? And I think that companies, I think that's how they're going to look at 2025. Beyond that, who the heck knows? Anything could happen. I think that's kind of what we're going to see, my perspective. And then on the point of AI, I think we're finally starting to see some leaps forward in true efficiencies, in truly helping people be better at what they already do. And I do think that is going to lead to less hiring, less need for talent. Then I think we're also going to see talent finds a way. As always, we're not going to just give up on our junior talent across any of our markets. AI is gonna influence how we hire junior recruiters, junior sourcers in a similar way to how we hire junior engineers. And what happens to that talent when we are hiring fewer of them? Something's going to happen. I don't know what, but those people are there and they're good. And I don't know if we're going to see a boom in new companies really taking advantage of the AI in a more specialized way. But I think this next generation that's coming into tech is coming at it with a whole new set of tools and a whole new understanding for what they can do. They don't have to just their spot in Google or Facebook or Microsoft. They can go do something different. And I think we're going to see a good amount of that once the money listens up when it comes to like VCs and investors and that perspective.
Those are excellent perspectives. Thanks for both of the comments there. And I think it makes me think of a couple things I've been seeing and reading about, looking at like our students, even in like the elementary or more in the middle school and high school age. My mom's a teacher, and they're teaching students how to use AI responsibly and ethically, how to think about using AI to be efficient. And so that's the next wave of new grads for us. And so that's the kind of mindset that we're teaching, at least in some schools in some areas. So I think that's a smart thing to do instead of saying, oh, don't use this thing that's now here. Pandora's box has been opened. So how can we embrace the tools that make us more efficient, whether you're an engineer or a talent acquisition professional? I think that we're seeing those efficiencies move from incremental to more meaningful. And I'm seeing that not just with customers in engineering, product marketing, and adopting it for core business use cases, but certainly in talent and recruiting, especially implemented around interview, recording, summary tools, and then sourcing tools, scheduling tools. And we're starting to see the pass-through rates tick up incrementally. I'm not hearing a meaningful increase in offers accepted, but I think that we're starting to see things increase with efficiency and should increase with scale. Also, certainly planning has changed. Whether you're doing demand planning on the revenue side or you're looking at like talent teams and doing headcount planning, I think one of the stories I'm hearing is it's moved from, a single annual plan that's set in stone and we're locked into it's monthly and it's changing and people have to learn to be flexible. And there's almost just, a laughing response when,
I've just never experienced a single plan that was held to in my career.
an episode a few years back, and Jeff Gray at ServiceNow had a great talk about how he does planning. So check that episode out if you're curious. But I think things are more fluid than ever. And just a final comment around how things might look is hopefully next year, uncertainty has reduced. And so hopefully we can make decisions that are more influenced in not just certainty, but some optimism. I'm an optimist. So I'll leave my comments with that note. Any other thoughts, Melissa or Garrett, before we part ways here?
On the AI front, I do think you're right. We are still in incremental improvements, not just in recruiting, in HR, how managers operate. I've seen some really interesting conversations around performance management and using AI to streamline what is a very painful process, right? Planning, financial planning, and tracking, very painful for a lot of companies, has not been solved. And that's an area where AI has also helped. But I don't think we've seen true innovation yet in that space with regards to people functions. It's maybe not as important as in engineering functions, right? And we've seen incredible innovations there, but I don't think we've quite seen it. And I'm an optimist, but cynically, I think that it's going to be very much related to, does it make money? Is it valuable from a commerce perspective to make those kinds of innovations? And once it is, I think it'll happen. And companies like LinkedIn or Rippling or Ashby, they're on the cusp of that. But it's got to be something that people want to buy before it's going to be something that actually is just anything more than an efficiency gain, in my opinion.
Garrett, any final words for the audience?
Yeah, no, just thanks for the conversation. Always fun to have a chat with both of you. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you both for being here. I want to say, I'm cheering both of you on in your individual career paths, and I'm cheering the tech community on, the talent, the recruiting community. It's been hard. There's been layoffs. They continued yesterday and this week. But again, hopefully after some of this uncertainty is behind us, at least we know the path that we're marching down. So thank you again. And thanks everyone for tuning in to the Lean In podcast. Take care.
Bye. Thank you.